Hello everybody, and thank you so much for joining us today for a video podcast and a roundtable with three amazing industry experts from different sides of the industry. And it's such a joy to have us all in the same room today to hopefully have a nice deep conversation about the fashion industry, manufacturing, and the fibres and materials that are used and how they're used within our industry. Welcome all of you, and thank you so much for taking the time out to do this. I know you're all super busy.
Thank you.
First of all, I think it would be really great if each of you could just give a very short introduction so that we can see the expertise that's in the room today. Perhaps, Kerry, we could start with yourself.
Thank you so much. So I'm Kerry Bannigan. I'm the Managing Director of the Pvblic Foundation. The Pvblic Foundation uses media, tech and data to advance sustainable development globally. With that, we run partnerships, campaigns, convenings and programs, a lot with governments so that we can integrate culture to drive the change that we need to see, whether that's from billboard campaigns to global events, and as well as for those that are listening today, two of our programs relevant here are the United Nations Fashion and Lifestyle Network, as well as the Fashion Impact Fund.
That's great, Kerry, thank you. Matt, perhaps you could continue?
Of course, yeah. Hi everybody, my name is Matt Neville. I am the Chief Commercial Officer here at Recover. Recover is a materials science business. Our aim is to deliver innovative, low impact, high quality recycled cotton fibres and circular solutions at scale. So in essence, we are taking all of the waste from within the supply chain, using that waste and turning that back into new product that can be used to make new garments.
Okay, Ross?
Good afternoon. I'm Ross Newens. I'm the co-founder of Print Logistics based in Poland. And Print Logistics is probably one of the only so-called digital microfactories in Europe, where we specialize in developing cut and sew production for our clients. It's an innovative business, and we think we're the only one in Europe to date.
Definitely the future, isn't it, Ross? On-demand manufacturing.
Well, I'd like to think so, as we've invested heavily in the business.
Okay, right, let's dive straight in. Let's go for it then. What are the biggest challenges facing the fashion industry in 2024? Kerry, but I think you'd be the best person to start this part of the conversation and get off.
Thank you. I think I'm going to come in a much broader perspective than my peers here. But I think when you look at this at 2024, the industry is actually facing several significant challenges. And this goes across from societal, environmental, and then even through to technology. And it's going to be fantastic to hear what Matt and Ross have to share on the innovations that we're seeing. But what I want to really look into is when you look at the environmental impact, the resource use, and even the waste, right? To many listeners that are here, they know the fashion industry is notorious for the high resource consumption and waste generation. We're hearing a lot about the circular economy that's going on as well. And I think what we have to look at is how can we go from what we're talking about as a problem to transitioning to solutions, but what does that actually look like? We have to look at what is a very complex issue that is going on. From production processes through to consumer behaviors when we want to tackle such a thing. Then when you're looking at also supply chain transparency and ethics, we know that labor conditions are one of the highest critical issues within the fashion space. And what is that going to look like? And with that, you hear about traceability that could come into play. But for looking at as well the peers that we have here today with us, where I think this is going to be really looking at is the issue of how can we really advance technological integration? What does that mean? How can the fashion industry grab digital transformation and get ahead, whether that's across new technologies that can better the supply chain through to the consumer experience, but also make sure we're being less resource intensive. And then, but there's also not to forget data security, privacy, all of that stuff too. But when we look at the technologies, we're always hearing about the pressure on the fashion industry, these new innovations, how to be competitive and what does that look like. I think what's going to be great for the listeners of today is Matt and Ross are actually going to be able to share key examples, case studies and best business practices on what we're looking at when we talk about innovation and competition in order for the fashion industry to be able to address some of the issues that we're seeing in 2024.
Over to you, Ross, with the same question. From your perspective, from the apparel and decor's perspective, I guess, what do you see as the biggest challenges facing the fashion industry in 2024?
Well, I can't really talk about the sort of macro environment of the sector, fashion sector. What I can talk about is the opportunity that we're developing to produce garments on an on-demand basis. Typically we all know the statistics of 1,000 T-shirts are bought, 300 are sold, 300 are sold at discount, and 300 go into landfill. And our whole mission is really about ensuring that actually only those clothes that people want are purchased. So the on-demand process. Now, this started really just in simple printing directly onto blanks, and everybody's familiar with the direct-to-garment printing capabilities, and these are global. And it's a huge business in itself. But the next step from there is really to take that and elevate it to actually looking at producing whole garments with individual designs for specific customers. So a bespoke product for the individual. Now, everybody wants to be green and go green, but nobody really wants to pay for it at this point. But we've now, through automation, through API connection to a lot of print-on-demand platforms, which have access, will give creators and merchants global access to their consumers. We are now able to offer handmade or custom-made, I would call it streetwear at this point. This is not about necessarily high street fashion. This is really about streetwear targeting the millennial audience or the Generation Z, or whatever you want to define that audience profile. And here we can take the sort of simple streetwear garments, leggings, hoodies, sweatshirts. We got around about 36 different templates which we've created. And all of these garments can be produced within 72 hours on demand. So this is a very, very small part of the industry, but it is one which we've seen tremendous growth in the last 2 to 3 years. What we lack really is a commitment from, let's say, a larger brand to enable us to offer this service to them. And that's really, I think, where there's a kind of miscommunication between the current supply chain management in the big brands and organizations or companies like ourselves who are nimble, who can offer solutions, but not yet at the scale perhaps that they require. But if we can work in collaboration and they can make commitment in terms of potential volumes, then we can scale our business accordingly and develop beyond maybe streetwear clothing, which I've outlined. So it's that kind of my feeling is that the challenge is really for those larger brands to actually look further down the food chain and start working with innovators like ourselves and not being dependent upon the traditional supply chain, because that will take an enormous time to actually change.
Ross, do you also think here as well it's time to rewire the business model of the fashion industry, and that the margins that are left, that are within the product, are so heavy because they are going to waste so much at the other end of it? Do you think that would really help you onboard new customers if the margin scenario, the costing scenarios change?
Yes, I mean, all the statistics have been run. Everybody knows the margins are there, but what they haven't got is the scalable resource yet to meet their demand. So, it is its rethinking, whichever way you want to describe it, but it's more about the connectivity and commitment from the larger brands to smaller enterprises like ourselves, who can develop much more rapidly than a traditional supply chain provider. And I think that's where the disconnect sits.
Yeah. Matt, Both Kerry and Ross, finishing off the question of the biggest challenges facing the fashion industry in 2024, what would those be from your perspective, with, from a fibre materials perspective?
Yeah, well, I think first of all, Recover is positioned, of course, at the bottom of the supply chain, right? So we're fundamentally feeding in, the fibre in at the very, very start of the processes. So one of the big challenges, we as a company face is getting the brands, getting a really good understanding, first of all, about how our product can be used. So it's going back to the real start of the process, actually, in the instance of design, truly trying to understand, there's a lot of education that needs to be done at the design stage to understand how to use new materials, new sustainable materials. How can you use recycled fibre? What percentage could you use? What garment type, for example? So we find, one of the challenges actually starts at the very, very beginning, in the brand itself. And we do a lot of work there to do a lot of workshops, bring people through the facilities, to tours around our facilities in Spain, Bangladesh, etc. And, what we see there is when people come into the facility, walk around the facility, and then start to see what product can be produced with this fibre and see the quality you can achieve, it's almost like a bit of a light bulb moment, right, where people suddenly feel, oh, you can achieve this. There's a lot of preconceptions about this recycled material is not good. It performs badly. It doesn't give great quality. So a lot of the buyers and designers that come through from all of these big fashion brands are really, really happy when they see that quality. And as I said, the challenge is therefore really at the start of the process, from the designing aspect. And that's where we really, try to start the early discussions. Once you get into the design aspect, of course, and get that underway, and you build roadmaps and you really help people and educate people and add value, then the second part for us is actually around helping them on transparency pieces, the challenges around that in mapping and understanding the supply chains. But really also, for us, it's making sure that we are producing a product that ultimately, does not disrupt their supply chain, and make sure that we can add value and achieve the qualities they need in doing so, because fundamentally they are producing, of course, fashion and trying to do it in a sustainable way. And that's really where we try to help and partner with brands, and of course try to get strategic commitments from them in order to drive, a very clear roadmap and path together.
Okay. Kerry, what do you think the biggest issue then is for the adoption of environmental best practice? And from my side, just listening to both Ross and Matt, education and knowledge share seems to be a huge problem.
Yeah, and I think it also, though, presents like an opportunity, right? We know that the solutions and systems are there. We know that they're sitting there, like, with Ross and Matt, what they're showing, just the innovations that they're working on. But what we need to see more of is less gatekeeping around education and knowledge sharing, and what can happen as people are coming up with these solutions and innovations. How do we then start to share that with peers? What was once seen as an extremely competitive sector as fashion, if we want to go into this sustainability best practices, we need to be able to show that people can show their R&D together, their case studies, their reportings, what's going on, what has worked, what doesn't work. And there's a lot of power that can happen if we can move this education and knowledge sharing together. When you speak about, the issues that are going to affect the adoption of environmental best practice, I think what you've got to then also look at is, once the education is out there, what does it then look like for financials to make these solutions happen? Right? We know that the fashion industry is not getting the correct investments to scale the solutions that can drive the change. Once that happens, how does that then trickle down to ensure how we're affecting high resource consumption and continuing on with this waste generation that we're always happening, that actually the fashion industry is reliant on? I think also what we've got to look at is, Matt had touched on about transparency. And I had mentioned that as one of the challenges also. When you look at this, we need to start having pioneers and trailblazing breakthroughs in the fashion sector, whether we're learning this from other sectors or actually within our own, but how we can actually achieve this transparency and traceability across the supply chain. And again, it leans back into the education and the knowledge sharing. There is so much that's already out there. We don't need to keep having new innovations happening. There's incredible things in the market. There's enough in the market share to drive the change that we believe are challenges. But I do think that money is a huge barrier to being able to drive these innovations. And I think when you look at people coming up with solutions, I think those that are holding the finances have to also understand it's never going to be the same rate of investment. It just isn't. We have to trust that in order to enable a massive change for global issues, it's going to take very heavy investment. Or we need to change the word. Maybe it's not even an investment. It's donations. It's grants. It's piloting. Because to get change for people and planet, you might not get money straight back. And I feel like there's a lot of pressure on the innovations in the space to be able to show these workings, help the environment, do better by people, and then still hit with high margins. And that's why I think we're operating an extremely archaic mindset that actually is the one mindset that got us to the issues that we're facing, that we need to be able to break through that and understand that sustainability is a solution that is needed. It's critical for what we're facing around the world, and that we need to have a few more believers with their wallets in the disruptors.
I think believers, Kerry, is the key to it, and commitment, to be honest with you. You know, if you have belief and you have commitment, they'll find the money. And, you know, that's the issue. If there was one CEO out there of an H&M or a big brand who said, I want to do this and I want to make it happen for us and our shareholders, it would happen. You know, this is potentially a drop in the ocean for an investment that they could make, which is a catalyst for change. But so far, you know, as I said earlier, I mean, I don't know how many trade fairs and shows I've been to. I've seen, you know, met multiple middle management teams, senior management teams, CEOs, etc. And they all talk the talk, but they do not commit and allow somebody in the organization to take a risk. And I think, you know, without that commitment to risk, we're going to be, you know, we will have to, as an organization, as a company, we will have to focus on the smaller disruptive brands until such a point where those become, you know, 5%, and then they realize, oh yes, we've got to do something about it. But it's a great pity that they just don't take a step forward. So if any of the listeners to this podcast are out there, I think that's the message I would get across. Matt's innovation, our innovation, is there. It's ready. It just needs that commitment.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, from different perspectives here as well, Ross, because of course you are pioneering technology. You have built the print logistic factory over in Poland from the ground up. You have embraced and added and new technologies as they have emerged, you know, and they're emerging so quickly as well. You know, if you have to look back just in the last 3 years at workflow automation and where we are now on workflow automation, you know, taking on Kerry's point before about transparency and traceability, all of those things are, you know, you are gradually weaving and rewiring all of those into your system because you are a new business as well. You're not new, but it's a lot harder, isn't it, for the fashion, for the industry at the other side, people with legacy production, to make that huge investment and to be able to switch and be agile enough to embrace new technology and run with it, do the best things you possibly can with it, really, all whilst trying to remain commercially viable and manufacture projects at speed and, you know, employing and covering one's overheads, etc., etc.
Well, I think they just need to redirect a certain percentage of their investment capital to this and make that a commitment to their shareholders that that's what they're doing. And I think that will be the catalyst finally for something to happen. You know, we're in a situation whereby we can do all the automation. We can take on board perhaps potentially some of Matt's fabrics, which would be great. We can use those in our factory at scale. the issue has always been in the past, the human resource. I mean, we still need to have, finally, predominantly ladies, I have to say, but we have to have seamstresses. But that's not really an issue, because ultimately we can have a sewing academy. We can have a constant throughput to enable us to have sewing until the future is not far away, when there will be sew bots which can do the basics for us. I mean, square shapes are possible now. I've seen some innovation also with regards to garment production from using robotic technology as well. So these things are there, but in the short term, we've got the fabrics, we've got the printing technology to enable us to do it, and we've got the human capital to actually make it happen. But we just need commitment from a bigger partner to scale the business. We've got 50 workstations today. We could have 100 in 2 weeks' time. We could have another 500 relatively quickly. It's just a question of knowing that we've got the demand there. That will also help in terms of reducing the overall cost. I mean, it just needs that, I don't want to say it again, commitment for a catalyst.
Yeah, absolutely. Matt, what would you say? Scale, same issue?
Well, I think Recover's really tried to differentiate itself by offering a scaled, as we say, a scale solution in that means consistency in product. It doesn't matter where you're buying that from, and this is a relatively new, this is what brands need, right? They need a consistent product depending on where they need it around the world. So we've worked hard to build specification, build quality, in setting ourselves up to work with these big fashion brands that we talk about. And I've come from a printing world. I think I've sold everything from swing tags to leather patches to hangers and pretty much everything relating to a garment, right? Now, what I would say on a positive side, right? I've only been at Recover since November, but the relevance of the topic of what we are doing, a little bit to Ross's point around, people are very interested. And the people and the sort of levels of the organisation in brands that I'm reaching, very, very high levels, just in a very short time. I've met many CEOs actually. So for me, first of all, relevance actually, is clearly there, right? Because people want to understand a little bit more about what are we doing, but how we can help them, of course. But we're relevant. We're relevant because they know, as we pass through the next few years and with consumer pressures, legislation, of course, coming in, they do need to do something. And, where I've seen the change on those that do things and those that clearly would like to do a collection and take some, sort of marketing from that and present a picture. Of course, we are set up to build and work with those that want to give the commitment, the scale, like we talk about here. And for us, thankfully, you have to find a key stakeholder in each organisation who's willing to be that sponsor, that person who really wants to get that change, make that change in their organisation, because it is disruptive. What we're doing, we are disrupting supply chain, and in doing so, that creates lots of noise, and some people don't like change, and this is the thing we fight with. So we often have very good senior conversations. But then as it filters down the organisation, and then everyone has their own targets and the raw material directors, etc., and sourcing people, and then we get into Penson, and then we get into a whole host of really detailed conversations around efficiencies, what happens when you adopt the fibre, etc. And then you get into the real sort of detail, right? And then that's where, frankly, a lot of times it's hard to navigate through that, because you do need a fundamental goal, a sign up, a North Star to aim at with the brand in order to work together to achieve something. And thankfully, as we have some brands doing that now. So on the positive side, we do have those. Yeah. But certainly, there are a lot of other people, of course, that are following, and those are the people we need to help educate and take on the journey.
Thanks, Mike. You've led us into that question very nicely. Kerry, from your perspective, the supply chain, what do we need to do? What does the fashion industry want to do to enforce change, to accelerate this?
I think it's a very loaded question, because we were saying it about the whole industry. But I think the reality is there is many camps in the industry. There's some that are not moving because they are fine with where they are, their bottom line, where they're going, what they're doing. Then you've got the innovations that are going on that need regulations that would push things faster for them. I'm going to come back to the financial side as well that they're going to need. I do think what's going to be interesting is we're always hearing a lot about consumers are demanding. Things are being driven by consumer needs. I'm actually not a big believer of that in regards to, I know that if it's available, there are many consumers that want it. But the reality is we need to, again, coming back to mindset, we need to be setting the industry from the beginning. What's the design phase? What's the build phase? How are we building things to what it looks like towards the end, whether it's recycle, reuse, reduce, all of that. And so I think this is a question for a whole podcast by itself, I feel, because do the people on this call want change? Absolutely. Is it an uphill battle for everybody at some point or another in their day, their week, their annual reporting, all of that? Absolutely, because this is difficult. Does the industry want this? I don't necessarily think so for everybody because it doesn't suit. But as we sit here trying to be pioneers of a better sector and what that can look like, I do think we need better regulation. And I say that also as someone that's sitting in the US. You know, you are seeing a lot that is happening and starting to move across the EU, which is absolutely incredible. But again, we're operating a sector that is not connected globally. So what happens for an organization in one place isn't enforced or shown to be better business in another place. And I think for the fashion industry, where it actually gets pretty dangerous and scary, is there's too many loopholes for people to be enforced right now as a business to do good.
How does legislation and new regulations, digital product passports, for example, over here in the UK, how does that affect both yourself and you, Rob, and you, Matt, too? Ross and Matt.
Yeah. So from a Recover's perspective, the legislation and needs and drive for better transparency through DPP, I think, it is one of the things we need in order to help create this change, right? Because back to Kerry's point, back to Kerry's point, look, the organisations are also set up, to sell fashion and sell lots of it, and we all know the volume sort of piece is now, slowing down, right? The need to produce the volume, and therefore diversifying into different types of range, getting more premium, achieving better full price sales, etc. is been a big change over the last few years. Like everybody on this call, I've followed fashion for the last 25 years, from when it was in Europe across to Asia, and now see what's happening in China, of course, and things are slightly to move out. But again, you're not going to take the huge exports of China and put it anywhere super quickly. So for me, it then comes back to lots of cost pressures because, as I said, no cheap place to produce anymore, or countries to produce anymore. And now we're thinking, rightfully so, minimum wages and cost of living, etc. All of these pressures the brands have to manage. I think, it's competing pressures. And therefore the price topic and trying to get a new change and new materials in for sometimes a very minimal amount is really quite hard work, right? It is really, really tiresome to do this. And, sometimes I'm talking about a cent on a fabric, right? Really? To make a big change in the supply chain. So, for me, that's sometimes a little bit crazy, and I have to sort of, refresh my mind on what I'm doing here. But thankfully, there are a lot of people that do adopt. But the transparency piece for us is really key because, again, using sustainable materials. Unfortunately, the industry has suffered in the past for people claiming things for, and rightfully so. And we're proud to offer a product that can be traced, and you can, if it's 20% recycled, we can prove it's 20% recycled, right? And that's, I think, going to become more and more important for the credibility to back up the claims that the brands, are going to need to conform to.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because it kind of opens up that question about, we talk a lot in our side of the industry, in the print industry, about nearshoring, reshoring, etc. But going to Kerry's point about legislation, if you are manufacturing close proximity manufacture, by nature, it implies that you are sitting with all of the legislation where you are operating. So you're supplying and delivering in one location and using all of those regulations to promote your products.
Yes, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Ross, from your perspective, are you hopeful that legislation will enforce change as the years move on?
Well, of course. I mean, I'm hopeful that it will happen. I'm also hopeful that there'll be sufficient enforcement to actually make it happen. And I think that's where the key issue will come. Finally, if those brands are enforced and are fined for not doing it, then they might be able to start weighing up this difficult cost analysis, which Matt alluded to earlier. We're talking about cents in the dollar or the euro in terms of being able to be profitable. But of course, it will be great when it happens. I'm just a little skeptical at the moment that actually there'll be significant or sufficient enough enforcement to make it happen relatively quickly. But if this happens within 5 to 10 year scale, I guess that will be a very positive position. I mean, I might not be around to see it fully enforced, but I believe that it should happen immediately.
Kerry, what's your opinion on timings?
Can't happen fast enough, but also there's the fact that we do see movement, right? Different places around the world, we are seeing movement. Sometimes when I see, for example, the Fashion Act being led out of New York, and you see it's being pushed out and it can't go through again on this timeline, but it will be revisited on the next set. They're not getting ignored. They're just being asked to refine things. What does this look like? The hows, the whys, and how do you make a reality? I think it's going to take time because it's so complex. But I do think when you look at some of the things moving, and again, I'm going to come out of the US, when you see other things that are moving a lot quicker, again, the governments and the regulatory bodies want things to happen. To Ross's note, I do believe if things were to happen in the next 10 years, those that want it to would just be happy to see anything happening. I just don't know if we've got 10 years for what we're starting to see and is going on in the industry. And so there's the paperwork, what it needs to take, those that are stopping it, that don't want it because it doesn't suit their bottom line or what this could mean for business going forward. But I do feel like we're seeing progress, even with submissions and feedback on the different legislations that are going forward. We're seeing that happen now every quarter with the Fashion Act.
Okay. Finally, our final question, we've kind of just touched on it. Where will the industry be in 2 years? Short term, what can we do? Let's end, it's, as Kerry said, there is so much positivity, there's so much going on, there's so much amazing innovation. The work that Recover are doing on fibres, particularly in cellulose. And I was talking to one of your staff with Kerry actually in New York a couple of weeks ago, and just the little tiny things like that you have developed a technology that doesn't shorten the cotton fibre. All of those things, all those little nuances under the hood of our industry are so important. But we have to share that knowledge. We have to pass that all on. We can't continue to sit in silos, can we, and not talk to each other? But then we have to somehow make more and more time to pass on the information to make sure that people can access it and create everything in a circular fashion using the right resources. People know where Ross is, where Print Logistic are in, what can they do, all of those things. It's so important. So important. Matt, what would your thoughts be for the next couple of years? Where would you like to see the industry?
Well,
it's a short timeline, 2 years.
Yeah, well, exactly. I think 2 years is a very short timeline, and when I consider a lot of the goals of the brands are, sort of 2030 and some just before, right? We've just done a really sort of deep dive into the next 3 to 4 years actually, and like you said, from a quality, and we've got to do a lot of sort of retelling stories to what this product is not what you think it was. There's a lot of changes, and we're doing that through showing the final product, because again, people can't resonate often to a fibre, right? But they can, of course, to a fabric, where it ultimately ends up. And when you start to show, look, you can achieve, 40, 50% of recycled content in this particular garment, and this is the quality you can achieve, and durability also, is improving. Then it is about re-educating and it's innovating and keeping people aware that a year ago, we were, the quality improvements we've made just in 1 year is significant. And I'm sure, again, as we go forward another year, we will start to introduce more different types of products, blends, strengthen products, get better qualities. And again, then you start to go into improving quality as a whole topic. And again, we become very much more relevant. But for me, I think the next 2 years, if we can be in a position where, of course, we are using and starting to commit to using more sustainable materials and really committing on scale, not in 100,000 pieces or a 200,000 piece collection. If we can achieve that, and frankly, the whole topic of transparency, which we talked about a little bit earlier, around the complexity of that mapping. And also at the bottom, I can completely understand how complex that is. But being really transparent, if we can be in a position where you're using more sustainable materials and showing how that looks, then I think that's achievable in 2 years. But it also is a wish as well for me personally.
There is this constant need to re-educate, isn't there? Because Ross, just from our side, from the printing side of things, and I'm going to talk about pigment inks, for example. So my partner and I, we pioneered digital printing for quite some time too. And early on, pigment inks were launched into the marketplace, and they were too early. They were not credible. They didn't meet the industry's specifications. And as a net result, it slowed the adoption of digital printing process into the pigment area, which is the biggest sector of the entire print industry. And now, of course, just 3 years later, pigments are viable, high-speed, high-performance pigments running through single-pass machines, thousands of meters an hour, totally doable. But we have to constantly re-educate the industry, Ross, don't we? You come across it all of the time because innovation is so fast.
Well, yes, but I mean, I have to be quite optimistic. If I think back, we started, 5 years ago with a single DTG machine, just printing blanks. And here we are, 5 years later, with a fleet of DTG machines, but also a growing part of the real growth part of our business is in the all-over print product division. So at the end of the day, what I would like to see in the next 2 years, if we've got 30% of our business now is focused and coming from the all-over print part of and cut and sew business, I would like to see 50% of our business in this sector, and and possibly even more. So, and I think that is achievable. That's very possible, even from our scale. We're not a big company, but even with working with the more disruptive brands. So, I've been a bit sort of negative perhaps about the whole sector in terms of fashion. But when I look at what we've achieved in the last 5 years, particularly in the last 2 years, I think the next 2 years we will double our capacity. We will double our footprint in terms of customers that we'll be working with. And in a very small way, that will be a positive sign that it's possible and it's achievable.
Absolutely. Kerry, to finish?
Yeah, I think from my side, just going back to something what Matt had shared, was we really can only, looking at what the last 2 years has achieved, you can only really expect to see a huge significant shift towards sustainable materials. The innovations and the speed that this is moving at has been incredible. I think also the circular economy models, we want to see a growing adoption of that. I think that's already in pace. I'm going to use a word I don't usually like to use, but when you look at social media and culture behaviors, the circular economy models are on trend. And you'd like to see that keep growing, right? Whether it's the resale to the rental, the repair, all of that. I think coming back to everything that's been touched on here is also the technology advancements. And I'm not someone that's big and plugged into the AI stuff. I'm still trying to understand if I want to get so into all of that. For those working in the innovation space, if they can use it to their benefit and to better items, I think in 2 years, I can't even imagine what we're going to be able to see when technology is used properly to be able to drive sustainability. And I hope that those innovations go beyond just materials, but how it also can drive change for better practices across the supply chain with transparency and ethics.
No, that's great. It's a great roundup, Kerry. I 100% agree with you. I think, by plugging AI in, who knows where we'll be. 2 years ago, nobody knew what a digital twin was. It didn't exist. Right. There are so many new technologies that we have to play with now. And also, I think for me, from my perspective, one language. I think you've seen that over the last 2 or 3 years, this beginning of one language, one source of truth to connect everything together. And when you have that, you have transparency, you have traceability, and you can manufacture sustainably at any scale. I think.
And I think also I want to add too that I feel like we're starting to see that shift in to start seeing more collaboration over competition to be able to get to the end result.
Yeah. We'll all say hip hip hooray to that one. More collaboration, definitely. Oh, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. Kerry, Matt, Ross, thank you so much. We could, as you say, take each of our questions today and do a separate podcast on that. Maybe we should do a number more roundtables and help share knowledge, I think, too. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.